Hello. We're continuing on with inheritance patterns that don't follow a simple Mendelian pattern. They are Mendelian, but they're not simple Mendelian. And what we're going to talk about next are genes on sex chromosomes. You might remember that in the end of Chapter 3, there's a discussion of X-linked inheritance of Morgan's experiments. So we're going to talk about that type of inheritance pattern a little bit more. So as we talked about in Chapter 3, many species have males and females that differ in their sex chromosome composition. And there are certain traits that are governed by genes on the sex chromosomes. If you look at a pedigree for an X-linked disease, it shows that it's mostly males that are affected with their mothers as carriers. So here's an example of that. So this is a pedigree for a human disorder called Duchenne muscular dystrophy. This is showing genotypes. Half-filled symbols are presumed heterozygotes, so those would be females. And if you look around the pedigree, all of the affected individuals which have completely filled in symbols are squares, so they're all males. And all of these affected males have a mother who's a presumed heterozygote. If we look at Punnett squares for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, if capital D is the non-disease-causing allele and little d is the disease-causing allele, if we cross a homozygous non-disease-causing allele female with a male who has the disease, he carries the disease-causing allele. Here's the Punnett square down here. We get unaffected female carriers and unaffected males. Whereas over here in the reciprocal cross, if we cross a female who is a homozygous for the disease-causing allele to a male who's unaffected, again we get unaffected carrier females, but both of the males in the Punnett square are affected. So reciprocal crosses are crosses where you swap the gender with regard to the trait. And that's a key tip-off that something is X-linked, is that it doesn't behave the same in reciprocal crosses. Sex-linked genes are those found on one of the two types of sex chromosomes, but not both. They're most commonly X-linked, and they're hemizygous in males. The X chromosome in humans has a lot more genes than the Y chromosome does. So sex-linked genes are usually X-linked genes. Males only have one copy of them, and so they're more likely to be affected, as we just saw in the pedigree that we just looked at. Y-linked genes, there's relatively few genes in humans that are Y-linked. They're referred to as Hollandric genes. We're not going to go through any crosses, but a striking characteristic is that they're passed from father to son, and that's all. One interesting pattern of inheritance is called pseudo-autosomal, and it refers to relatively few genes that are found on both the X and Y chromosome. It turns out that there are short homologous regions on the X and Y chromosomes that are needed for the pairing during meiosis. And here's some examples. The red, the yellow, and the green are homologous regions that are found on the X and the Y. And in this region here, the MYC2 gene is found on the X and the Y. And so it can be transmitted from father to son, and mother to son, and mother to daughter. So it behaves like an autosomal inheritance pattern, even though physically the MYC2 gene is on the X and the Y chromosome. So if you followed its transmission in pedigree, you wouldn't be able to tell it was on a sex chromosome. But it actually isn't, so it's called pseudo-autosomal. Okay, well this is an example of how sex and sex chromosomes can affect inheritance patterns. Next we're going to talk about issues where the genes are not on the sex chromosomes, but the sex of the individual affects the phenotype.